I want to first talk about the notion of the map and redefining it. First defining it. And according to J.B. Harley and David Woodward from the History of Cartography, maps are graphical representations that facilitate a special understanding of things, conditions, processes, or events in the human world. They are visual instruments that guide the individual through the city they depict. Through the manipulation of the drawing conventions and the use of abstract signs, maps guide their viewer through a maze in an artificially constructed field of forces which define the physical reality of the built environment. However, maps could hardly ever be understood as purely objective representations. While the making of a map often involves a lengthy process, of gathering and interpolating large quantities of information, maps are highly controversial artifacts which register the prevailing contextual demands of their cultural field and personal input of their map makers. So let's redefine the notion of the map as drawings that could possibly reveal the hidden factors or usually unacknowledged components of the city, and reinterpreting these into some kind of spatial form. So revealing the multidimensional view of their topic, maps are encoded with many layers of technical and abstract data reflecting the legal, economical, environmental, social, and political circumstances within a city. And one of the kind of key figures in the early 20th century, architect Hugh Ferris, he was able to beautifully render the legal components and the environmental components of the city through the compelling depictions of his 1916 zoning ordinance, also known as the evolution drawings. What he did is he brought forth the uncertainties of the 1916 zoning ordinance into a visual outcome by essentially taking the textual components of the law, which were considered quite uncertain at the time and also boring as a text, and turning them into a three-dimensional form that could be understood by many sets of audiences. So essentially, he combined art data into a spatial rendering. And first used charcoal to create dramatic techniques to give his work such graphical powers. So while the first two drawings in the evolution series mainly addressed the legal requirements of the ordinance, designated to alleviate congestion and increase light and air into the city, the last two of the drawings showcased the architectural consequences of the zoning laws as they reflected the financially established conditions within the real estate market. So the evolution drawings are best described as portraits of the new cities, and that were expressive vistas into the future of Manhattan's urban conditions at the time. His drawings often embraced the popular press covers, New York Times, and his drawings, again, could be understood by all sets of audiences. And of course, during this time, there's also a set of other drawings and diagrams that were showcasing this kind of textual component of the law. But Ferris's renditions remained far more superior both in their graphic quality and their informative content. So I want to actually read this quote by New York architect and critic James Sanders, who comments on the influential impact of Ferris's zoning drawings. The impact of the architectural rendering grew even more pronounced in the modern era. In 1916, New York passed an innovative zoning law that sought to preserve a measure of light and air in the crowded streets by requiring the buildings set back. But it took a series of charcoal drawings by the brilliant illustrator Hugh Ferris, published in the New York Times in 1922, to show the thrilling architectural consequences of the law. Indeed, as the new breed of towers began to rise, Ferris's moody drawings of their mountain-like masses proved as crucial as any built work to setting the tone of New York's surcharged urbanism in the 1920s. So essentially, Hugh Ferris's works were one of the first kind of datascapes. And datascapes are a facilitator of information. And jumping forward in the late 90s, Wim Mias, VRDV, was exploring the concepts and applications of datascapes. And similar to Ferris's visual investigations of the ordinance, a datascape served as an architectural language which turned statistical descriptions into representations of theoretical envelopes in which perhaps cities or built forms could be placed. So he was taking things like text and pretty much expressing the visual and non-visual influences of natural and cultural conditions, such as energy consumption, increase in population, wind, water, into some kind of fantastical image or landscape or formal expressions. And in the 60s, information architect Richard Saul-Berman, who's also known as the founder for the TED conferences, he really highlighted the ideas of drawing visual comparisons between cities with different data types. So in 1966, he developed a book called the Urban Atlas, which primarily profiled 20 American cities, including Boston, New York, and Washington, and created a series of maps that depicted urban information for these places not normally shown. And today, he is working on a new project entitled 1920-21, which basically looks at 19 cities in the world with over 20 million in population in the 21st century. So I encourage you to look at this website because it does look at a lot of these kind of unexpressed types of information in these kind of mega cities. And so like Ferris and Werman, I was interested in expressing the unexpressed and creating a marriage between the fact and the fiction into some kind of communicative platform. And the question that came to my mind was, how can the abstract forces shaping urban life be rendered artistically and informatively in a form of alternative maps which represents urban dynamics not usually accessible to the architect or urban dweller? And in what ways do these new visualizations provide deeper insights into our city? So I was thinking of a series of hybrid maps to draw and merge data, art, form, and landscape surface into kind of re-imaging the hidden aspects of the city. And I termed these hybrid maps as map landscapes. Examples of these kind of forces in the urban context would include things like criminal activities, zoning bylaws, population densities, public surveillance, cell phone usage, air qualities, and other kind of statistical information that very much affect our city but are not normally shown into some kind of form. So right now I'm going to be showing to you a series of these kind of map landscapes that basically take text or two-dimensional kind of maps and engages them and then transforms these into kind of a spatial format or a landscape surface. So in this particular instance, this is the city of Toronto engaged by showcasing its landscape based on density. And then further to this, I was actually interested about the idea of art. How could this space be crafted into some kind of artifact? And so far, I took that digital image and crafted that into a 3D form. And to get even a further kind of understanding of the city, I superimposed an aerial photograph of it to get that more connection with it. And then kind of going back with the reflection of Hugh Ferris in mind, I was looking at one core of downtown Toronto and taking the zoning bylaws and actually taking the constraints from the city ordinance and trying to craft this into some kind of digital process as well, similar to Ferris, of course, using digital means. This next set of image looks at, actually yesterday a lot of people were talking about surveillances and public surveillance. So I was interested in spaces that, define public surveillance cameras that randomly dot our cities. And how do they begin to create a new urban form that designers must adhere as part of the design process? So this is the image that basically is the three-dimensional view shed of this particular component in the financial district in downtown Toronto. The next set of image that I'm showing you pertains to relooking at how crime creates the map landscape of the city. And so in this case, I was looking at the 33 bureaus and taking the crime indices for these and engaging them within a two-dimensional map and crafting some kind of a landscape. And in this case, crime is always, or most usually associated with a negative connotation. In this case, the data itself was then with a negative topographical forms. And these somewhat resemble, some people have said, almost like a hellish underground scenario. Or, for example, they also refer to them as icicles in this case. So these are some of the images that have been shown for London. The next set of image looks at actually perceiving what Werman has done with his graphical images of New York's residential population density, and then transforming this, of course, with today's data into some kind of map landscape. And as you could readily see, compared to the city of Toronto, this one here has a much higher mountainous peaks in relationship and comparable to the super city. And now kind of taking this another step further and looking at further partnerships, I was thinking of also placing these kind of images into its context and using other kind of softwares that are out there, for example, like Google Earth, and placing these images within here. So this is another image of that. This is the city of New York perceived by crime. This image here represents the market value of New York's spatial outcome. And not also with 3D maps and this idea of crafting it into an artifact, I was actually looking at the idea of 4D, of course. And in this particular instance, I was looking at the idea of merging or linking traffic camera images and reinterpreting them into an urban network to show volume flux in the city of Toronto. So I'm just going to show this quick animation. And as you can see, it almost becomes this idea of an artery system, of a pulsating cart of growths during different times of the day. And this kind of idea of looking at data and crafting it into some kind of spatial form or some kind of art has also been worked in several of my courses at the university. And I'll just show you two examples that I thought were kind of interesting. This one here profiles a spatial interpretation of biomass and greening component in an urban block in downtown Toronto. And so this biomass is also taken in section. This other one actually looks at a spatial interpretation of the BioQuad in Cornell University. And this student was interested in the spatial interpretations of the site's permeability using measurements of water, stormwater runoff as a data source. And then this was actually crafted into a physical model as well as the idea of it becoming a stilled artifact. And more recently, I was working on this other project and looking at creating these kind of map landscapes for the Great Lake region. And I'll just show you about 3 of these. And one of them is map landscapes that express levels of activities in the Great Lake regions. And they are basically abstracted from a base map of population density and light pollutions. And so there's this kind of notion that it captures this uncanny metropolis of glowing transparent buildings shooting off from their city centers. This one here, I guess people from Wayne County might be interested in this one. It actually shows the spatial resultants based on benzene levels in the county regions within the Great Lakes. So the larger these bubble spaces are, the greater or the more alarming depiction of high benzene levels in the urban cores. And after doing this, the southern tip of Lake Michigan, Chicago metropolis area, and the western edge of Lake Erie near Wayne County and in Detroit showcase the highest level of these toxins. And one of the final images that I'll show you for the Great Lake regions is taking the textual information of listings of housing prices and relative costs of living in this area, and they have been synthesized into a value system. And this becomes the map landscape for that region. So urban cores including Chicago, Cleveland, Milwaukee, Hamilton, and Toronto depict the highest mountain and peaks for this type of data sets. And so this kind of work is, it's actually coming, I have a book coming out next month that profiles like a theoretical study of mapping as it relates to visual representation of the city from early 20th century to today. But the essential core of it is this idea about exposing things that are not really expressed in the city into some kind of visual outcome that could be understood by all sets of audiences. And I want to end off just see like the time just on time, with this last animation of ozone spaces in London. Oh, do I click again? Okay, thank you very much. That's it. Thanks.